Tell the viewers who you are, a little bit about your journey, and the message that you want folks in Simcoe County to learn from you.
Goodness gracious.
I know that's a lot, right?
Totally. Okay. So what's number one? I think number one is that I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to ensure that not one more person has to live one more day of their lives not their true, authentic selves. No more closets, Amen. No more hiding away, no more being ashamed, no more feeling guilty. Step into who you truly are, because who you truly are is beautiful.
Agreed.
So everything I do really revolves around that mission, that vision, and you know, to have a Canada that's just totally inclusive, that nobody is judged or discriminated against for their gender identity,
right.
Their gender expression, their sexual orientation, or for that matter, any other reason.
Yeah, and no one else should care either. You know, I mean, I guess we should care, but it shouldn't be an issue for anyone else.
No, it shouldn't. And how is it that we have that as an issue? You know, one of the things that I do, I have the wonderful experience of teaching youngsters about diversity and inclusivity, and I use a pebbles metaphor.
Okay.
So what I'll do is I'll take in a little bucket of pebbles that I've washed and cleaned up. So I divide the class into two, typically, and I give them each a little pile of pebbles. And I declare that the first group to find me two identical pebbles will win a prize. Now let me tell you, in grade 1 and 2, and actually older, they try very, very hard. It's beautiful to watch. And of course, they don't find two identical pebbles. So then we talk about the differences. We describe all the differences of the pebbles that you could imagine: their color, their texture, right, their shape, their weight, their size, all these things. And then we look at that list that we have up on the whiteboard and we say, well, what if we apply this list to people? Do these all apply? And of course they do. And we elaborate. And we say, well, despite all of these differences, they're all still pebbles, right?
Right.
We're just people.
Yep.
We're just people.
That's beautiful.
Can we, yeah, right?
Yeah.
So can we not just embrace that diversity and love it for what it is?
Now, not to be an naysayer, but how realistic is that vision for our world, though? Do you think that's something we can actually achieve?
I do. I think it's in our capacity to achieve. Whether we choose to achieve it or not, that's something else entirely, right? You know, oftentimes visions are exactly that. They're this almost utopia of the imagination of where we want to get to.
Right.
And so long as we set ourselves and we head in that direction, every step we take is a step towards that goal, and that's really all we can do. So I think so.
So maybe take us on your journey so we have an idea of where you started and how your progression is towards that goal that you've set.
So my journey started when I was born, funny enough. And the nurse declared that my parents were now the parents of a healthy baby boy. Well, honestly, while she could ascertain that I was a healthy male, because physically that's how I appeared, she really had no clue as to who I was, because we don't reveal that for a few years, right? We kind of keep that to ourselves. And so growing up in the 60s and 70s in England, there really wasn't a lot of information about. Can you believe there was no Google? We didn't have internet.
Shocking.
Right? Shocking.
I think we're the same vintage, so I totally understand that.
And I had no frame of reference. There was nothing I could look at and say, yeah, that's me, or I relate to that, or you know, rather there was actually not very pleasant imagery around gender diversity back then. And so what did I do? I built a closet and I locked myself in it. And you know, a major proportion of myself I locked in it. And for the first 50 years of my life, I spent in that closet. And it wasn't until 2007 I was battling with depression, struggling with my identity, and it's like a pressure cooker. The pressure just gradually keeps building and building and building, and at some point it blows.
Right.
It blew for me in 2007, and I spoke to somebody, a therapist, about how I was feeling, and that was the very first time I had shared how I was feeling with anybody, ever.
And you were how old at this point?
46, 47.
Wow.
Yeah. And I would then embark on a journey, a 3-year journey, of really trying to save everything that I would later lose. Recognizing that if I followed this path, I was going to lose my family. And I didn't foresee losing a lot of other things, which I did, but the main thing really was about not losing my wife and partner of some 20 odd years. But that was inevitable, certainly, back in 2010. So the net result of all of that, 2011 was my transition year. January started off with my hormone therapy, and by December I was out at work, and the journey, at least in the social transition, the journey was well underway. But in that process, I did lose contact with my ex-wife. I lost contact with my 2 stepchildren, 6 grandchildren. I lost my house. I lost my career, actually, as well. I lost just about everything. I got as low as you could possibly get. And one of the things that certainly back then, and even today, stops people from speaking out is the fear of losing something, right? If I'm going to be public about an issue, and it's not a popular position, then the chances are I'm going to lose something as a result. I had nothing left to lose. And that makes someone, whether it's an animal or a human being, pretty dangerous, actually.
Absolutely.
Right? So I'm not really a danger to the world, I have to say, but I had nothing left to lose. So when the opportunity arose for me to get up and share my story and speak out about these issues, speak out about diversity and inclusivity, I just seized the opportunity for that reason.
And I think there's this, when you talk about danger, I think there's a certain power in having nothing left to lose as well.
There is a certain power.
And I think if you're able to harness that, which clearly seems to be the path that you've taken,
it was.
That's what makes the difference.
And I never imagined I would be on this path. I really didn't. Many of my contemporaries went through school for this kind of work. They were editors of the college newspaper. They were activists. They were protesting on the streets whilst at school. I was not one of those people. I really wasn't. And here I am. So you never know what that path has for you, leading forward. You've
Absolutely.
got no idea what that looks like.
Yeah, and as you say, you focus on so much of what you feel you're going to lose that you can't set sight on all those things you're going to gain as well. Well, absolutely, there's a lot of loss that comes with those type of journeys. And it's unfortunate that we can only see that and not really see the gains that are going to come.
The gains have been incredible for me too. I mean, I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. Mm-hmm. It's funny, I've shared my age, but I look at a photograph of me around that era of 2007, 2008, and I look 10 years older then than I do now. It's like the clock is going back for me. I'm feeling younger almost every day. It's bizarre, but
do you still recognize that person?
Oh, that person, I lived with that person for a long time, but make no mistake that the outer appearance and presentation of that person was fictitious. The inner person, however, was always the same, right? I've known how I've felt. I've known I was different. I knew there was something about me since I was very, very young. And I've had wonderful experiences through my life, and I've done amazing things. I've been to incredible places. I've met wonderful people. I don't regret a moment of that, really. But when I look at the occasional old photograph, all I see is pain. You know, all I see is the inner torment.
Right.
And it makes me a little sad for how it was back then. But it, you know, it just so isn't like that anymore.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I mean, I look back at myself in old yearbook pictures and with the advent of Facebook and reconnecting with friends from high school, and I get messages from friends in high school saying, "You haven't changed a bit." And I'm like, "Yeah, you didn't know me well in high school because number one, I don't look a thing like I did in high school, the hair, but I don't even recognize who that kid was back then."
Right.
You know, and it's not that I want to forget, because I think remembering where we've been helps us to really appreciate where we are now. And much like yourself, I'm happier than I've ever been, than I ever thought I could possibly be.
Right.
And there's a certain satisfaction in that, but at the same time, for myself anyway, I've sort of put like a shadow on the past, and I have a very difficult time having clear recollections of my high school days, for example. I'll see pictures and I'll remember being at this event, but I think it's more of the picture reminding me than actually having those memories any longer, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. And you know what? I've come to this position in my thinking and my life through a lot of hard work. You know, there's been a lot of hindsight going on. There's been a lot of unpacking what went on with me in those formative years. And, you know, puberty and adolescence and that whole elementary through high school, even into college, was just torture, just pure torture for me. And so whenever I look back at moments like that, it's hard for me not to be triggered to remembering how I was feeling at that point.
Right.
And just, you know, the conflict that was going on inside of me at that time. And it's hard to draw pleasure from the things that happened during that time. So, you know, a lot of what holds us back is fear. And I really want to take the fear out of living your true self, right? And so that, you know, people, and we see it today, younger and younger people. I love when I get the opportunity to support trans youth. I love when I get the opportunity to support the parents of trans youth. And
that's a pretty key element to supporting trans youth, is making sure they have that support from their parents, correct?
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's life-saving, frankly. And the work that organizations such as PFLAG do, as well as many other peer support groups, in supporting parents who are choosing to be open to their child's identity, and regardless that it's going to be a difficult journey for them as parents too, right? And it just, you know, every time I come across a parent like that, then, you know, I just want to hug them like forever. So, you know, Rick Prashaw, author, came through just a week or two ago with his book, Saw Adam Saw. It's such a touching story, but this is a parent who supported their child through this transition. And it's
and a
just
parent
beautiful.
who recognizes that it wasn't his story.
Right.
So even with Adam's passing and Rick writing this book, it's still Adam's story.
It's still Adam's story.
Which I think is wonderful. And the fact that Rick recognizes that and owns up to some of the mistakes that he may have made along the journey as well, I think that's huge. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be in the audience when Rick spoke here in Barrie, and very touching. And I'm not completely through the book yet, but what I have read so far, it's one of those things that I can only read so much, and then I have to sort of dry up a little bit before I can read another chapter. But yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. And those sort of supports, as you said, that saves lives.
It totally saves lives.
And as a parent, you know, my number one thought when it comes to my children is I want to make sure they're safe and happy.
Yeah.
And whatever that means to me, whatever I have to do to make sure that happens, I'm going to do it. So the concept of any parent not accepting their child, regardless of what that child decides their choices are or decides to live their authentic self, if you're not supporting your child and you're risking your child's life in doing that, It's an oxymoron to me. It doesn't compute.
I know, right? I recently had a parent ask me if I thought there were more trans people in the world, because, you know, what some people will see is an increasing visibility of trans, non-binary, gender diverse people in their surroundings. And, you know, my answer to them, frankly, was no. I don't believe there are more trans people.
Yeah.
There are just fewer locked closets. We're creating a safer space and a safer community and a safer society that enables people to really step into themselves.
Right. And yet still, so much more to be done.
Oh, there is.
I mean, I opened up Facebook this morning and saw a post about a transgender woman in New York who was murdered.
The murder rate is just dreadful.
It's
just dreadful, and particularly when we have the intersect of trans women of color, for example.
Yes.
Two-spirit people.
Yeah.
You know, when we have these intersections of the most marginalized in our community, and we're seeing this this violence and these deaths, it's just awful. It kills me every year. We have Transgender Day of Remembrance each year, where we read the names of all of those that have perished at the hands of transphobia during the past year, and the numbers are still increasing year on year, and that has to stop.
Yeah, no, it's staggering. And as you say, it's those marginalized within an already marginalized group,
right,
that we lose sight on. And I think you and I would both agree that we speak from a place of privilege.
Totally.
And I think it's recognizing that and that responsibility that comes with that privilege to be able to do what you do and be an advocate and an activist around these issues, that it's important that we don't forget those folks who don't have that platform.
That's right.
And I'm a big believer of leave no one behind, and make sure that we focus on all those who don't have that voice. We have to be that voice for ourselves, but when we decide to take this platform, we have to make sure we're a voice for all as well.
Yes, we do.
Not to speak out of turn, or I also don't speak for someone of color, obviously. I don't have that lived experience, but I can certainly be there as an ally and support them and prop them up and make sure that there's a space for those individuals as well.
Yeah, totally.
So tell me more about your role. I read through your small list of achievements and the things that you're doing now, but tell me what it is you're doing. What are you focusing on to really make that difference?
I think there's a number of areas. You know, my work is somewhat international. My wife is Ukrainian, so we often have the opportunity of working together, which is remarkable. She's a doctor of medicine, an unbelievable activist in human rights and LGBTQ rights in particular. You know, thinking about the challenges of somebody who came out in her formative years in the former USSR, it's, you know, she blows me away every time I think about that. So we have the opportunity of working in Ukraine, for example, on human rights. I have the opportunity of working on a national level here in Canada with organizations such as the Dignity Network, which is a network of 46, I think now, organizations from across Canada, civil society organizations that have an international lens. So we're doing a lot of work around that, which is really exciting. We have the Canadian Trans Network, which is in its nascent stages, but which is an exciting opportunity. But then even in my local community, I really love the opportunity to be able to get up and share my story. Like you said earlier, I don't speak on behalf of anybody else, but what I do is I share my personal journey in a way that hopefully puts a human face to the trans lived experience. And 9 times out of 10, what I find, and I found this very much in Ukraine, for example, you know, transphobia being a fear of trans people is an irrational fear. I think we can agree on that. Yeah. And what we find is that most people who experience that transphobia haven't actually met or sat down and spoken with a trans person. And when they do, we are able to change hearts and minds. I mean, I really see that happen right before my eyes oftentimes during some of the workshops that we do. So that's an example of the kind of work that feeds my soul, is when I have that chance to make a difference, to change somebody's mind, to have them open up to the thought and the idea that we are all just pebbles. We're all just people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I think that's important because it's that stigma that comes with the idea of being transgender, or for myself, someone living with HIV, that until you actually get to know me and talk to me and hear my story, and while again I'm not an expert and I can't give everyone's lived experience, I can only share my own. I obviously do have a lot of knowledge around what it means to live with HIV, just like you have a lot of knowledge of what it means to be a trans woman. And I think when you're able to sit down and actually speak with someone and get to know them, that helps to dismantle that stigma. That it's education, but it's creating a connection, right? And realizing that yes, we're all pebbles.
Well, and dismantling a lot of the misinformation, disinformation that we see. I mean, we're in that troubling time. You know, I'm a devout technologist, but you know, I also totally recognize the challenges of the social media platforms that we have. The role that media plays in common opinion is huge. You know, I came through the Jerry Springer era of media coverage for trans, queer, gay folk. You know, that was a brutal time. We've been able collectively, and my contemporaries before me have been able to change the narrative with mainstream media in a way that they are much more respectful about the way that they cover issues. But you know, the intersect with HIV is a great example of a challenge, and that challenge is that it's just not a key population oftentimes within HIV prevention programs,
right.
And yet we have this several intersects within the trans community where we have a higher risk than normal of contracting HIV. And we're not paying enough attention
right.
to that demographic, and that's something that has to be changed.
Agreed. So what's next for you?
What's next for me?
What's the next big thing
I think
on your plate?
Probably the most exciting thing for me as a documentary filmmaker, it's time that I got on the road and I shot my next documentary. So I think that's the big one for me, is to travel right across this fair land of Canada, the land that embraced my transition and gave me a safe space to come out and be myself. But I am in a privileged position. Living in Southern Ontario is a privileged position in this country. The lived experience of trans people across the country is very, very different depending on where you live. Right. And there's been amazing activists and community leaders and individuals that have made a huge difference in their communities, or even on a provincial or national level. So I want to travel across Canada. I want to shoot Transgender Life in Canada as a film that will document those experiences in a way that we can share those experiences on a wide stream basis, and look at the diversity and the richness of diversity, but also look at the challenges that people face in St. John's or in Yellowknife, or what's it like to be trans in those places. And today, and what can we do in those places? How can we come together as a community to support people in some of the most difficult places? So that's probably my exciting project that I'm working on, in the hope that I can shoot that early summer next year.
That's fantastic, and certainly a need for it, as you say, because I don't think, are there any federal programs out there that are supporting trans folks and trying to get that message across on a more federal level as opposed to a provincial or territorial level? I
mean, there is some work going on at the federal level. Just recently we got support for the Canadian Trans Summit, which is a convening of trans, non-binary, gender diverse and two-spirit people to come together from right across the country and work through some of those issues. And so that's very important. But there's an awful lot more that we can do. One of the things that I find distressing in this country is that human rights regulations and codes and programs differ by province.
Yeah.
So it's very much harder to live in Quebec as a trans person than it is to be in Ontario, for example. Right. So we need to level this out, and we need to fix that challenge.
Yeah, I think that's problematic in a lot of areas, that we have
it
these little provincial and territorial rules, but nothing federally that oversees all of that.
That's
and
right.
We are one country, and to have different laws from province to province just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to me either.
But I'm not a politician and don't plan on being one. So, but I do want to thank you again for being with us
My
this
pleasure,
evening.
Randy.
I really think that we're going to see more of Michelle on this program, because we've just scratched the surface, just barely. We haven't talked about your lovely bride, the life that you've created with Elena, and I really do hope to have both of you on the show in the very near future.
We love that.
But in the meantime, again, heartfelt thanks for being part of this program. I do hope you'll come back, and I hope you all will join us again when Elena joins us on our next program. Thank you again, Michelle.
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Thanks, folks. That's it for another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer with Randy Davis. Hope you'll tune in again next week.